You all okay? Okay, well, welcome everybody to monthly meeting on wine this morning. And we have Eileen, who is going to speak to us about wine. Unfortunately, we were just saying before people arrived that to have a wine tasting chat or a wine chat on Zoom at 10:30 in the morning or 11:30 with me is challenging, because you certainly can't be drinking any, but no samples, that's for sure. Eileen knows a little bit about wine, and I don't mean that just because she drinks a lot of it, but she's been doing some courses on wine with the Wine Spirit Education Trust, to give it its full title, and has done the introductory tutorials on 1 and 2, but the pandemic stopped her doing level 3. But you'll be starting that, Eileen, yes?
I hope so soon, yeah.
Hope so soon. So as well as being part of many wine clubs and enjoying drinking many varieties of wine, actually has done some study of it, unlike me, who's just studies it by drinking too much of it, especially when in Spain. So Eileen, just hand over to you for the next half hour or so to tell us a little bit about helping us as we make our choices in wine. On you go.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I love the way that you describe me, because I like being described as somebody who knows a little, because I know for a fact that there are people in the U3 that know far more about wine than I do. So and please, those of you that I recognise around my laptop, join in, because one of the things I was thinking, because of the challenge of trying to do something like this on Zoom, because normally you prefer it to be interactive. So what I thought is, I've got 3 visuals, and Peter, thank you very much. I think you're going to share the 3 visuals as I speak. So I've got 3 visuals, and what I thought is we'll do one and then open it up for a bit of comment and chat, and then do the next one, and then do the next one, and just try and make it a wee bit more interactive in that way. So I thought, let's do a wee whimsical wander down a supermarket aisle and just try and think, when we're choosing wine, what do we look for? And how could we make our choices a bit better? So there we all are standing there. Now, usually we're attracted by, forget about price, we'll talk about that later. Often we just go because we like the look of a label. And what I'm trying to say to you this morning is, forget all about, you need to know all about the grape varieties and all about the winemakers and so on. Let's just make it as easy as possible, so that, generally speaking, we'll choose something that we're actually quite happy with. So really, all you need to know about is basic geography. So sounding like Patrick Whitty then, Peter, next slide, please. So there we are. Now, there we've got the world, and really, it depends on proximity to the equator, because obviously the closer that we are to the equator, the hotter it is. And the hotter it is, yes, the more that grapes like it. But if we're too close to the equator, grapes don't like it, because they don't get the chance, or the vines rather don't like it, because they don't get the chance to rest during the night. So that's why those 2 pink strips are the areas that, by and large, you are going to get the wine from. Forget what the numbers mean. This is actually about coffee. I stole this slide from a coffee thing I was reading. So the numbers mean nothing for this, so can forget about that. But if you look at the pink strip, so you can probably look there and see where your favourite wine is, and you'll notice that it will be in the 2 pink areas, in the northern hemisphere or on the southern hemisphere. And these are the 30 to 50 degree latitude lines. So by and large, even more large than by, then your wine should fit into those 2 within that range. Now, within that range, you'll get hot climes, moderate climes, and you'll get cool climes. And in each of these, you'll get a different type of wine. Again, think back to what we were saying. Obviously, the nearer it is to the equator, the hotter it will be. So that means the riper will be the grape. Probably the fuller body will be the wine. The grapes will have thicker skins. So if it's red, they'll have more tannins in it. If it's white, it might be more tropical in taste. Whereas if you're in a cooler clime, then you're going to get a lighter wine, a fresher wine, a more acidic. So a bit of fun, again, if it was possible to do this in some interactive way, we would be looking at the latitude lines of your favourite wines and of some of your favourite wine growing areas. So if you think then, for example, southeast of England is now very popular. I don't even know if that's pink on that, but the southeast of England now does a lot of lovely sparkling wines. And it's 50 degrees latitude. It's right on the edge. If you go to Champagne area, or if you go to Chablis in northern France, it's about 48 degrees. So you can start to see how we're getting the white wines that I personally like, which are light and fresh and zingy and acidic. But if your preference is a white wine that is going to be fuller bodied and maybe more, I get a row calling a wine viscous and thick, because it makes it sound as though it's going to be syrupy, and it's not, but it's really just the opposite of the type of wine that I would prefer. You're probably going to go to somewhere where it's far hotter to get a white wine. Maybe you would go to California and you would enjoy a Chardonnay from there, or maybe go to Australia to maybe something like the Hunter Valley. And there, both these places, we're talking about 32, 33 degrees latitude. If we're looking at red, then if you like a light red, because lots of people that don't enjoy red wine will enjoy a red wine that doesn't have any tannins in it. So what they like is a red wine that's made from grapes that have got very thin skins. So it'll be the Gamay grape with Beaujolais, or it might be Pinot Noir. And again, we're talking about from the Burgundy area of France, that's about 48 degrees latitude. Whereas if you like something fuller bodied in a red wine, then you might like a Malbec from Argentina, or Moussard from Lebanon, or Cabernet Sauvignon from Stellenbosch, and all these would be about 33 degrees latitude. So sometimes then when you're wandering down that supermarket aisle and you see people with a strange look on their face, they're probably just trying to work out how close their chosen bottle of wine is to the equator. And remember, of course, when you're in the southern hemisphere, it's the opposite way about, that you've got to think. So it would be in New Zealand, while it might seem far away to us, it would be described as a cool climate. And that's why lots of people who enjoy a light, minerally white wine would go to New Zealand. They would also go to New Zealand for their Pinot Noir, because it's cooler. So I think maybe if we stop there and maybe have 5 minutes just talking round about that, maybe you can think about your favourite wine, or maybe you can think about a wine that you've considered, but now you know that you would like, or perhaps that you wouldn't like. So Peter, could you unmute us?
I can't unmute you all automatically. Just unmute yourself if you want to speak.
Right, okay then. All right, if anyone wants to put something on the chat box.
Sam has just unmuted himself.
And if not, I will move on to the next slide. It's no problem.
Any comments?
No. Okay, right, the next one then. So the next one's more related to price. And
sorry, so could I just ask a question?
Of course.
So are you just talking about sipping wine as to wine related to what you're eating?
Either. No, I'm just talking about drinking. I'm going to talk about eating wine in another slide. Or not eating wine, eating with wine. So because some people choose to, just as you say, enjoy sipping wine, and some people would only drink wine if they were eating at the time. So it's just the decisions that you're making will be reflected in these slides. So we'll talk about food in the next slide, if you've got a food question there.
Thank you.
Okay, so related to price, as you can see from looking at that we pay in the UK a lot of money in duty and in tax, as you can see with VAT. But look at the blue bits, that's the amount of money that we'll pay in duty. And the cheaper the wine, the more duty we pay. So therefore, people will always say to you, don't buy very cheap wine, not because it's horrible, not because it's vinegary, but because it's not good value. Very cheap wine just means that it's perhaps the umpteenth pressing of the grape, or it's perhaps very light and watery. But it won't be unpleasant. You will drink it, you will enjoy it and immediately forget it. But it's not good value. That's usually why people say don't drink cheap wine. And this particular visual shows that very well. If you're in, as Liz is just now, she's in Spain and lucky enough to be in there. If you're in a Spanish supermarket or a French supermarket, don't equate our prices with their prices. We probably would be very reluctant to buy a bottle of wine in Morrison's if it said £1 was the cost of it. If you're in Spain, buy it, because you can look at that and you can see that if we paid £5 for a bottle of wine at home, it's really only 37 pence worth of wine. The average price of a bottle of wine here is £6. That's seemingly what the average consumer will spend. So that will be what, 50 pence of wine, something like that. So if you find yourself in a supermarket abroad, if you're lucky enough to be there, just go for it. Liz, you might be able to back us up and tell us about some of the wines that you buy at some very cheap prices that we would be.
I think the Cava at €2.60 is the best buy there is, and it's really very pleasant. And I was very dubious about it at first, but I was introduced to it by a friend, and she assured me it would be fine, and it was more than fine. It was very pleasant. And people were buying, champagne and this at 20, 30 euros, and I'm thinking, just spend €2.60 on the Cava. It's a little golden label on it, and it's very easy on the palate, as they say, and it's very pleasant. But yes, sometimes whenever you go into the supermarket and you see something that's very inexpensive, you think, oh, it must be rubbish, and it isn't at all.
No, it won't be, and it's just because we're used to heavily taxed prices, and the Cava that you choose to buy will probably be £8, £9, £10 if you bought it back here, and you wouldn't have that same aversion to buying it back here because that's the average price that we would pay. Now, those of us that are in the wine Zoom, or many of us that were in the wine Zoom, had personal experience of this recently, because pre-Brexit, I used to buy a lot of my wine from Portuguese wines or Portuguese vineyards. And I would get 12 bottles of wine, probably pay £2 to £3 a bottle of wine, and I would get that for round about £60, £70-ish. And now, since Brexit, I'm still buying it, though I might stop doing it soon, maybe. But the last couple of crates or cases I've still bought, but I've had to pay £54 tax. So, and I'm still buying them because I enjoy the wines. I eventually managed to whittle down the ones that I really enjoyed. And now I'm paying the price that we would pay in the UK because they're so taxed. And as many friends have said to me, what I need to now do is, because I enjoy doing that, I will sit on the website and while away an hour. What I now really need to do is that advice that wine folk are always saying, go for good value, don't go for cheap. So if I pay more for the Portuguese wines, I'll get a better wine, but I'll still have to pay, as you can see from looking at that, I still have to pay the same tax, but proportionately I'll get a better wine for it. So there's when you're choosing your wine again, and if you're going by price, then just remember that you will not get with a very cheap wine something awful and vinegary. What you will get is something very, very light and watery. We've probably all bought the cartons of wine when we've been abroad, and those are the wines that would don the tables of French families, never on a Sunday, because on a Sunday they will push the boat out, but on a daily basis they will drink that, and it will just be extremely light and watery, or watery as we would say. But it won't be awful, but as long as you know what you're paying for and the amount of tax we've got there. Any questions about tax? If you have, just unmute yourself and ask, or we can save all these questions to the end. Okay, right, we'll move on to then food pairing. Okay, now this is an interesting one because by and large, as you know, we would always say to people, if you like it, go for it. And I chose this particular visual because it's a complex game. Looking at that, you know, it's not as simple as, in fact, is it even accurate to say if I'm having fish or chicken, I'll have white, or if I'm having red meat, I'll have red. Look at all the combinations that you could think of because of everything. So trying to make it as easy as possible, I think you just go back to geography. An obvious one is if you choose the wine that's the region that you're eating from. So if you're having seafood, then you're going to choose a wine that comes from a seafood area. You know, Muscadet in north of France or Picpoul in the south of France because it's coastal. So you would do that. If you're having a steak and you didn't know, then go to Argentina and have some Malbec. So that's a very obvious one to make. But the other decision to come into is how light is the dish? And that goes back to what we were talking about previously. If you're having a very light fish dish, very light chicken dish, very light meat dish with no complex sauces or anything like that, go for one of the light reds or the light whites. But if you're having something heavier and a little bit more complex, or not even necessarily complex, macaroni and cheese, they say, the pundits would say, go for a Chardonnay to have with macaroni and cheese, just because it's made with a buttery sauce and you get a lot of butter in Chardonnay, and that just makes it just that wee bit more complex. If you're going for something like a ragu or a bolognese, then go for a slightly more complex red, you know, something that comes from hotter climes, or obviously a Chianti if you were Italian. If you're looking at a light dessert wine, if it's a light thing like a roulade, a meringue roulade, then go for a light Asti or Moscato. But if it's something like a bread and butter pudding, you probably are wanting something heavier and sweet like a Sauterne or a Tokay. Now, having said that, and with me saying, no, go for whatever it is that you like, because many people have got unusual tastes. I love having chocolate and red wine. I absolutely do. And many people would say that you shouldn't like that, but I do. And you get lots of red wines that have chocolatey tastes too. But other people will go against it. But what I would say is, if you've ever had the experience of not liking a wine, and I mean as in, it's not that it's not the type of wine that you would favour, but it just makes you go, oh, this just isn't pleasant. Chances are you've been eating it with something that would really go against it. So it could be something you wouldn't have custard and smoked haddock, or I don't know, mince and chocolate at the same time. So why would you do that with a wine? It would mix things up. So I think it's more about just thinking about geography there. And maybe some of you are hopefully you're going to say to me, do you know, I really like this wine and I love eating it with this. And maybe if you unravel why you like doing that, you will come to realize it's perhaps just because of the geography of the world and the way that things happen with that. Any comments there about wine that now who was it was asking about wine pairing or food pairing earlier on?
It was Viv.
I did.
Ah, good. Right. So what were you going to ask then about that?
Oh, no. I mean, you've answered it there, that idea that going with the light and the, you know, matching your palate and the quality of the food as well. So thinking about what you're eating, that's excellent advice, yes. I think Peter's saying it's got mince and chocolate go well.
Mince and chocolate go well. There we go. What? Oh, you mean like putting a wee bit of chocolate in when you're cooking?
In chili con carne, yeah.
Yes,
It's
yes.
a classic ingredient.
Yes, that's true. When it's bitter and things like that, yes.
Yeah.
I thought you were, I was imagining you sitting there with a big mug of hot chocolate and a big plate of mince.
Hazel's got a question.
Hazel.
Hazel, you've got a question. Would you put on?
Oh, can't hear you, Hazel.
You need to unmute yourself. Our question.
Here we are. Yes, I find the one grape I struggle with, drink just about anything, is Columbine.
From South Africa, yeah.
Yeah, and I just wondered, I think it's ignorance partly, Columbine, the Chenin Blancs and everything, but Columbine, what would you say matched with the Columbine grape? I think it's a very curious taste. I don't know if anyone else would agree.
Right, I'm going to be honest and say I don't know the answer to that. So I would have to follow my own advice with that, and I would have to think about South African cuisine. And I'm thinking about, what do you call it? The South African moussaka, which I find quite odd. Is it bobotie or something that you call it? It's
Poitiers.
Yeah, and it's minced with loads of fruit in it, isn't it?
Oh, gosh.
And so on in it. And then it's like it's not like an egg custard, because there's a savoury egg custard that goes on top of it. And I find that quite odd. I don't find South African steaks odd and so on and so forth.
No.
You wouldn't have probably columbard with that. So I wonder if that would go with that slightly odd
maybe
dish.
I have to say, Eileen, that neither of them, the food doesn't appeal any more than the grape, I think. But no, that's an interesting thought, that maybe something that has got that kind of mix of savoury and fruity, it would be worth trying it with. Yeah, well, there you go. Thank you.
We'll often say, when I have a curry, and so I just drink water, well, you know what they say you should be having with a curry is a yogurty drink or something like that, because we interact the spice. But if you really do want to have wine, then it should be something fruity. It shouldn't be something that fights with the spice. It should be something that plays with it and complements it.
Right, yeah.
But I just drink water with, which is rare for me to just drink water with a meal.
Yeah, but then you enjoy the wine. They say a Riesling, don't they, quite often with the curry, because of the fruitiness.
If you don't know what to have with anything, have a Riesling.
Right.
It pairs with most things. So when I sit the next level of the exams, when they say, except I won't, because I'm going to go and work it, I'm going to go and learn what you should be having with Columbine. But if I get that in my next exam, if I didn't know the answer, I would just say Riesling.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? What are some of your favourite meals and wines that you like with a food choice that you've got, or the exact opposite, a bit like Hazel, and we could crowdfund and try and solve that?
I must say, I've always been bemused by this, and I like wine, as you know, from the other group, but I've never seen the point of worrying about what you eat with and drink with wine. I suppose I drink a lot of it just sipping out with meals anyway. And apart from not liking red with fish, I'll eat anything with anything, and I don't see the problem.
I agree with you, as in I don't think it should be a problem. I don't think people should care about what they want. But if you want people to have the maximum experience, and if you want people to not be put off of a wine, and maybe it's because they don't like that wine just because of what they're eating with it. So it's if you're a wine enthusiast and you're just keen that people enjoy wine, then you probably want people to get as you are, Peter, because you enjoy wine and you know a lot about it. Sam, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. This was back to your original comment about latitudes of where one should. I remember being in Tanzania in the 1970s when they didn't import wine, and they grew their own wine on the equator, and it was probably among the worst wines I've ever tasted.
Oh, now that's interesting, because I've never spoken to anyone that's had wine from round about there. Well, actually, that to just take a wee sidestep, at the last wine Zoom that we had, remember, was it not Alan Christian had Indian wine? They brought some Indian wine to the meeting and said they didn't enjoy it. And I wondered at that time, I wonder if that was for the same reason that perhaps it was with you, Sam, that it was just too close to the equator and therefore it would just be too unpleasant because the grapes don't get the chance to rest and don't get the chance to develop. Was it really uncomfortable, or was it just not to your taste? What would you say?
Well, there were two. They were both made in a place called Dodoma. There was Dodoma Red, which was absolutely revolting, and Dodoma Rosé, which was just about palatable.
Now, Tanzanian wine is certainly something I've never seen in the shops
well,
or anywhere.
Don't bother to experiment on it if you see it in Morrison's wine aisle.
And a friend, well, I don't have it near me, I can't even think where it is just now, but a friend got me one of those maps of the world that you scratch off the wines that you've had from each country, you know, so you can work your way around the world during lockdown, but not go anywhere. And I think I can safely say all the bits in the middle were devoid of any suggestions, and it was just, but what was interesting, well, it's still within the 30 to 50 degree latitude, and those of you that enjoy wine on the Zoom this morning might be able to chip in here, are some of the unusual ones that we don't drink enough of. You know, a lot from the previous Soviet Union, you know, they've had a lot of wine growing history, a lot from the Middle East, like I mentioned Lebanon earlier on. So it's, and even at the last wine Zoom, just because the Olympics were on, I brought a wine from, I love how we say we bring a wine, because you keep it to yourself, because you're doing it on Zoom, nobody gets to share it. But I brought a wine from Japan, just because the Olympics were, and I have to say that surprised me that Japan had a wine industry, but they just, I think by and large, keep it for domestic consumption, and it was lovely. It was really, really nice. It was my type of nice dry white wine that I would normally enjoy. So then I went away and investigated it and realized, because I hadn't really thought about it, that Japan's on the same latitude as the other wine areas that I really like.
It was quite expensive, wasn't it, Eileen?
It was, yes. So it was £20, and while it was a fun thing to do because of that Zoom, and it was a learning experience for me, but I won't be regularly buying it because it was as nice as wines at certainly half the price, if not even a wee bit cheaper. But it was a fun thing to do for that occasion.
I know that the German Sekt is virtually never exported because they drink it all cheerfully to themselves and leave champagne to the French or import it to this country. So, and I remember you talking about the Japan being in the Ukraine, and many years ago, probably in the 70s, and almost being surprised at this beautiful champagne, pink champagne that we drank. It was the first time I drank pink champagne, and we discovered the wealth of choice in wines in the Ukraine.
Yes, I imagine that it was simply the case that during the Soviet Union times, they just didn't allocate the resources to the wine production because of all the 5-year plans and so on that would be going on. But the vines were still there because the vines were never uprooted. And so these economies have now got a resurgence in their wine production, and one assumes is good for their local economies too. So that was, and you mentioned Sekt. Sekt's an interesting one, yes, because you can't really buy it in the shops here, but it's the same as Prosecco. It's made the same way as Prosecco, which is made in a different way from Cava and Champagne. Sekt and Prosecco is made in tanks, and when they put the lid on to allow the carbon dioxide to become bubbles, it's fermented in the big tanks as opposed to in the bottles of Cava and Champagne, and it's lovely. Sekt is lovely. I've got friends who, I've got family in Germany, and pre-pandemic, when they used to go over in their car and they would load up on, and pre-Brexit as well, so they would load up on cases and cases of Sekt, and then we would all enjoy drinking it when we went to visit them. I imagine that's going to dry up now, which is sad.
Sounds wonderful.
Yes.
I do remember when I worked at the Goethe Institute in Park Circus in the early days, we're talking about in the 70s, that the Pierrot agent would come and do a wine tasting. And that was my first introduction to the ice vine, which of course is quite well known now, but at that time it was very new in this country, and a beautiful, I mean, a sipping wine.
But very sweet. In fact, Jackie, who's on the Zoom, Jackie and I had a wee try at that in Niagara Falls on about 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. It's, for my tastes, not something that I would usually enjoy, but I enjoyed, again, the experiences. So I enjoy even not enjoying something, if that makes sense.
Yes, the Germans, that's a very sweeping statement, but it's more sipping wines, and this would be late evening, you know, like somebody here might at that time have drunk a Drambuie. You might take some ice wine and just sitting around with friends later on in the evening.
Well, there's a thing that I didn't mention, and that maybe could have been a fourth slide, and it's maybe the occasion again. You know, how often have we enjoyed a drink on holiday and you buy it and you bring it back, and for some reason sitting in your living room in Glasgow, it doesn't just work. Doesn't matter, it just doesn't work. So the context can be everything as well. Have any of you, would any of you, from the things that I've said this morning, would any of you come up with something you go, no, I don't know if I found that to be the case? Are any of you now thinking of, has there been a particular type of wine that you've been keen to try and it's now giving you a wee bit more confidence to try it then?
I've avoided red wines for about 30 years because I always used to get migraines, not hangovers. I mean, because literally one glass would do it. But now I'm thinking maybe I should try some of the lighter red wines. Yes, just to see.
Now, I'm nodding. I'm not a medic, and I'm nodding enthusiastically and about to give you a headache. So I hope that's not going to happen. So the wine enthusiast in me would say, yes, absolutely. You know, it's a matter of finding what suits you. So I would suggest try a Gamay or a Beaujolais, try a Pinot Noir. Absolutely. Okay. For those and report back. Let us know the finds them.
The other, I mean, because of that, I drink principally white wines, but I've always avoided, for the same reason, wines that are obviously oaked or very, very heavy looking and, you know,
yes,
cloudier wines, because I perceive them as being oaked, and they would traditionally have given me, you know, 3 or 4 days of a migraine. Yeah. But I mean, that was a long time ago, and I very rarely get them now anyway. So, so maybe I should be more adventurous.
Well, someone was saying.
I don't know what that noise is.
I don't know. Well, when you mentioned that, that possibly is about the only wine I really don't care for is an oaked Chardonnay, particularly from California. And so I went to Majestic one day because I'm always trying to fight my demons. And remember what I said, I even like having a not pleasant experience. I just enjoy the learning experience there. So I went to Majestic and said, I don't like oaked Chardonnay, but I think that I've just, it's been the wrong circumstances or with the wrong thing or whatever. So they, for those of you that do like that type of wine, here's a good recommendation then. So they suggested that I bought Bread and Butter, which is the type of wine anyway from California, and they said it goes off the shelves. As soon as it comes in, it goes off the shelves very quickly. So they took me over to the California section, and true enough, there was, now either he's very clever and they just thought if somebody comes in today saying they didn't like oak Chardonnay, we can't get rid of this one, there's one solitary bottle there. But he sold me the last bottle, and I came home and I was all excited and opened it up, and I still didn't like it. It's just what you described there, Gail. It's still just that heavily oaked Chardonnay. And it was £15 a bottle. So it wasn't even as though, because you'll know that some of the oaked wines, what they do is they just put chippings in the vat where the wine is made, you know, as opposed to maturing the wine in a cask or something. So I thought it was probably just that I drank too much cheap oaked Chardonnay, but I still didn't like this. And I'm going to not give up yet, because there's 2 things I have to try, following my own advice. Well, it's not my advice, it's advice from all these courses that I do. And I should try it and have it with a mac and cheese, whereas I would normally just go for a nice red. You know, if I'm having nice cheeses, I would drink red wine with a cheese board. But anyway, they've suggested mac and cheese, or the other thing they suggest is a beef Wellington, because the pastry is buttery and it will go with the beef Wellington. You can tell from the way I'm talking, I'm a bit dubious, but I will make it my mission to drink that wine and eat those two dishes and report back. Does anyone else have a wine they just do not like?
I'm not a big fan of rosé wine at all. I mean, sometimes it's better than others, but the lighter it is, the nicer it tends to be, the less pink, but then that's really just white wine. So I don't know whether are there better rosés out there these days.
Again, I don't like a Californian rosé.
Okay.
I just find that it's a bit like I'm going into the Chardonnay, the old Chardonnay business, but I love a Provence rosé. I do, you know, but again, I can see what you're saying, Liz, because then you might go, well, it's just so light, why drink it? Why not just go for a white then?
No, it's something I've never warmed to. I've tried, but
I don't like those deep. Do you all remember the Pink Panther chocolate you used to get 100 years ago? It was very strawberry, very sweet and strawberry. Like it was probably a treat when I was a child. And every time I have one of these horrible, thick, deep pink roses, I think of this Pink Panther strawberry chocolate that my folks used to give me as a treat, or to keep me quiet or whatever. I got it.
Can I go back to the Chardonnay business?
Yes.
I got an awful shock one time. I got a favourite of mine was I like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, and I find the label on the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc for the Villa Maria is absolutely the same, whether it's a Sauvignon Blanc or a Chardonnay. You've got to look very carefully. And at one time, I made a mistake. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've gone off Villa Maria. And then I looked again at the bottle and discovered it was a Chardonnay. And I just hated it. However, I have discovered a Chardonnay that I liked. I discovered that I liked Argentinian Chardonnay. I don't know much about it, but I just tried it one time, and lo and behold,
you liked it?
That was pretty good. I enjoyed it.
Well, let's try and be an Agatha Christie about that then, because I would have thought that possibly you would have enjoyed a Chardonnay from New Zealand because it's a cooler climate. Because most people love Chablis, and Chablis Chardonnay. You know, and you'll hear loads of people say, I don't like Chardonnay, but I love a Chablis. But it's because it's a Chardonnay from a cooler climate. So it's more refreshing and it's more zingy.
Also unoaked.
No, I'm not so keen.
It's also unoaked, yes. But I wouldn't expect a New Zealand Chardonnay to be oaked. But I don't know. I mean, we need to look at that. So therefore, when you're talking about Argentina, so Argentina, the native white grape from Argentina is Torrentes, and it's quite dry. So again, if I don't know if I've ever had a Chardonnay from Argentina, but I do like Torrentes. So you've got me on to doing that, and I've got loads of homework I've got to do now. No one's going to see me for days because I'm going to be trying all these things. So I have to try and get food that matches column barred. I've got to try and like my oak Chardonnay, but I have also got to look carefully at the labels in the New Zealand Chardonnay. But I'm sure that I too would be like you. I'm sure I would like a Argentinian Chardonnay because I like other whites from Argentina.
Eileen, can I ask you?
Yeah.
I like a Pinot Grigio, and I wondered, we got this Marlborough Pinot Gris from New Zealand. Is that the same grape, or is that something different?
No, it is the same grape, but because Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio are, it's just saying white Pinot. But again, for the same reasons that we're talking about, depending on where it's coming from, will have a different taste. Like, I'm not crazy about Pinot Gris from Alsace. You know, I would, whereas a Pinot Grigio from Italy, I really quite like, but a Pinot Gris from Alsace, I find a wee bit more cloying and a wee bit thicker and a wee bit sweeter again.
Well, this one was from the Marlborough estate in New Zealand.
And did you enjoy it?
I loved it.
Right. Well, there's another one that,
like I say, I just wondered what the difference was between this Gris and Grigio.
No, it's basically the same, but if you've just got to consider then, where is that basic grape matured and grown, and the climate will have an impact on that. Other things that the climate, but like oceans, will give a saltiness and a freshness to the same grape. So you could plant the same grape in an area that was landlocked that would have a different, like Alsace, that would have a different inflection or in taste to the same grape. But if it was in an area that was close to the sea, and it would have a freshness and a like slight saltiness to it. Or if it was high in altitude as well, that would give a different taste, because it would be cold at night and they would get lots of chance to rest. So it might be fresher and zingier as well. So there's another, I should be writing this down. I'll possibly end up texting somebody to say, what were all these things I had to try, or we've all to try, and feedback. But I think that would be the reason.
Do you think it's a general thing that as we're all older in the U3A by definition? I mean, I certainly know that my palate's changed. Is that a general, or is that just an individual thing?
I wonder. I don't know if I have an opinion. I can open that up to everybody else. Do you think your palate changes as you get older, or do you think you just are more confident about what you like? Or do you think
I'd be more confident, and maybe you try things that maybe were more unusual, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
If I might, can I come in here? I have noticed now in my 80s, my palate definitely, like other senses, is getting weaker, and therefore I need a hearing aid for stronger sounds. I need glasses for losing my vision. And my palate, for instance, if I go to the extreme of what I like is like a malt whiskey, then I'm very keen on the Islay malts, because it affects my palate. And we as far as wine drinking, we're both very keen on reds. We tend to have reds in our cellar. And a wee question up there is on storage, that I have wine racks, and when we were younger and traveling through France in the days before the Euro, we would buy French wine, but I would ask for wine that, I didn't have to keep longer than 10 years. But as I got older, I realized that maybe in 10 years, that might be too long. And so now I don't buy any wine that I have to keep for longer than 2 years. So these are all little things I care about. And in storage, we keep bottles with corks traditionally at an angle, so the cork is always moist. Do you have to do that with a screw top? No. Can you just keep screw tops vertical?
Yes. And more wines are not using corks, and it's not a reflection of quality at all. It's simply that we don't have to use corks anymore. Lots of people like corks because, particularly not so much in the house, but if you're going out for a meal and you're choosing wine, and that's part of the theatre of going out for a meal. Somebody opening a bottle of wine properly at the table, and doing that, whereas somebody opening a bottle of wine and unscrewing it at the table isn't as aesthetically theatrical. But it is no reflection on quality at all. And you're right, yes, you used to have to keep your wine like that in order to just keep the cork from drying out. But
I've got an interesting wee story about that. And it was a fancy restaurant near on a visit to Mull, going over towards Ireland. There's a very expensive restaurant there we went to, and we had a meat course, and we ordered red wine, and the owner brought the wine already opened. They'd pulled the cork, and we complained about it, and he said, "Oh no, I pull the cork to make sure it's okay." Whereas, like you say, part of the pleasure of the wine is having the cork pulled, the sound, and you tasting it and deciding yourself whether it's correct. So my wife put in a report on the
TripAdvisor.
Yes, and criticizing it on that basis. Yes, cork pulling is part of the experience.
It is, and if you're going for a nice meal. I mean, I was at Pisano's the other night. You know, I don't expect when you go to Pisano's for a pizza that anyone's going to come along and with a bottle of wine and pull the cork, and you just have a very cheap, light red wine to go with a very pleasant pizza. So it's different things for different restaurants. But for example, if I was going to the Chip, I would expect that the wine would be opened at the table, and you would get a bit. In fact, they always do that thing of they put the cork at the neck and they sort of tie it round so that you can see it there. It's a wee bit of theatre, which I enjoy.
Thank you.
That's just a wee aside about price. Whenever you're buying wine in a restaurant, it will probably be 3 times the price that you would pay outside. So if you were buying a bottle of wine in wherever and it was £30, then you probably expect to pay £10 for it outside. £10 for all the costs of the staff doing the theatre and paying the staff, if you can get the staff now, of course, paying the staff and the heating and the electricity and the rent and so on, and then their profit margin.
Can I ask a question? It's a partly comment, partly question on really fine, first growth clarets. They all have corks and they're all supposed to be kept for probably 10 to 30 years. I wonder if they will ever get round to a screw top and what a screw top wine would taste like 30 years down the line.
Now, I'm, without knowing the answer to this, again, just trying to work out the answer, I suspect that it won't have any impact, that it is more the romance and the theatre of it, as long as, because screw tops have come in to keep the wine from oxidizing, and they're more efficient at keeping the wine from oxidizing. So I can't imagine that it would have any difference on the quality of the wine, but it might have a difference on the quality of the experience, when you're choosing to eventually open it. But that's something else to investigate. It's some people don't like to drink wine that's screw topped, but that might just be a personal preference because they enjoy the romance of the corks. What do you think?
Can I just ask about, sorry, Sam.
Sorry, I think for everyday drinking wine, the screw top is a lot simpler and just as effective.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I don't have any very expensive wines that I could try that out with. I'll need to ask around and find out. But I suspect it won't make any difference. It's just an aesthetic, romantic, theatrical thing. Peter?
I just wanted to ask about this idea of some wines getting corked, which I used to worry about, and I've certainly identified a few, but I don't seem to have had that experience for a long time. Is that because, was it ever to do with the cork? Because I'm sure I've heard that it wasn't really the cork that caused that wines to go off in that way, or is it because there are more screw tops that we seem to?
I think I think it's that screw tops have done away with that, and sometimes people will say, "Oh, this wine's corked," and it's not. It's just not their taste, or it's not. It disappointed them, or they didn't like it. I think it's very, very unlikely now that a wine will be corked. And again, it doesn't mean that the cork is off. It's just that the wine, for some reason, air has got into the wine and it's meant that it's oxidized in some way.
Yeah.
The other thing is you can keep wine for a lot longer than people think. You know, I've been advised that if you are drinking a red wine and you don't finish it, for whatever reason that might be, of course you can do all these things like turn it into ice cubes and put it in casseroles in future. But if you, as long as oxidizing it is the thing you don't want to do. So as long as you put a top on it that seals the red wine and then keep it in the fridge and then bring it out a day or two later and allow it to come down to room temperature, take the top, it will be fine. You don't need to, if you don't drink it that day, make a casserole with it the next day. You can give it a day or two if you try to ensure that air isn't getting in and if you're just trying to keep it cool. Also, as I'm sure you know, those of you that have lived in all these hot countries, when I was in South Africa a few years ago, they keep all the red wine in the fridge. I don't think we ever drank.
Yeah, I was going to ask you
room
that.
temperature red wine. No.
What do you keep certain red wines? I've noticed in certain parts of Mallorca that they do keep the red wine in the fridge, yes, because it gets very hot if you're at a restaurant. But would you keep some red wines, the lighter red wine?
Well, they said, certainly, it said that the lighter red wines, the Gamay and the Pinot Noirs in the fridge, yes, and you would serve them slightly chilled. But South Africa was the only place I had the experience of like a Cabernet Sauvignon, a Stellenbosch, whatever, coming straight out the fridge and everybody enjoying it. But then it was so hot. So I guess that's what you would do. The opposite is also true of you can serve, they say, you can serve white wine too cold. That often what people enjoy is just having a cold drink. That if you serve white wine too cold, you don't get the nuances of flavors. Now, to go back to what Gail was saying about oak Chardonnay, and the same here, so a complex white should be served lightly chilled, not cold, because you will miss out on all the nuances. Now, somebody like me is not that bothered about missing out on the nuances because I'm not that crazy about that as a wine. And my personal preference would be the light, minerally acidic wines that you do want to be well chilled. So often we have the white wine too cold and maybe we don't consider chilling lighter reds when we could.
Pink wine, rosé, I think is supposed to be really cold. And I agree with you on the white, but I've heard that rosé has to be very cold.
Yeah, because it should be, it's basically a white wine that's just had the red skins dipped in it for 12 hours or so. So you would treat it the way that you would, maybe again, the Californian rosés, which are thicker and heavier. Maybe, I don't know, because it's not particularly to my taste. If I was doing this professionally, then I would need to make sure that I had tried and tested all these things, and I would need to make sure that I knew. Whereas when you're just doing it as a hobby, you'll eventually get round to trying out all these things. But you've all given me some good tips this morning for me to try.
Well, as time marches on, and had loads of comments and loads of questions and loads of information as well, Eileen, and certainly, it's really interesting about what to choose and the cheaper wines and how much tax that we're paying. Yes, but we kind of knew that, but yeah. But not whenever you see it in a graph, it's really quite stark, isn't it? You think, oh, right, I'm getting 37 pence worth of wine. No wonder it's not so great. But loads of stuff there. And I don't know whether anybody was taking notes, but the nice thing is this is recorded. So if you do want to, it goes on to, where do you put it? It's on the website, and you can listen to it if you want to recap any of the notes.
It'll get put on, there's a YouTube channel, but you can find a link to that on the website.
Yeah, YouTube, yeah. But just, because I was going to say take notes, but you don't need to do that anymore. You can actually just go back and have a wee listen to it again. So yeah, that was great, Eileen. Thank you very much.
Oh, not at all. And I am going to try some of the things that many of you have suggested. And I look forward to hearing, particularly those of you who are in the Wine Zoom, and maybe it's made others of you think that you want to join the Wine Zoom, and we can continue to go on this wine journey ourselves and learn from each other. So thank you.
Right, thanks very much, Eileen. Thank you. Bye.